Chris Landry, welcome into the game, sir. How are you?
I'm doing good, gentlemen. How are you guys doing today?
Doing great.
Doing great, Chris. Glad to have you on the show.
Chris,
My pleasure.
Just open right up. We've been talking, obviously, first full week of Alabama camp here going on in the fall. Your thoughts about the Crimson Tide heading into camp?
Well, it's always an exciting time, as a coach. This is a very talented team, but they've got a lot of youth, and, it's always exciting but challenging when you're coaching young guys, getting them to do things right. There are things you can do in the spring to prepare for it. There are things you can do in the off-season conditioning program to prepare for what you're about to get what you're about to undertake. But it's hot, and you're going to be challenging guys to understand the expectation level of what is demanded of you for every meeting, every practice, conditioning, what you eat, your rest, which is probably the toughest thing to get young guys away from because they want to do stuff. They don't realize that rest is the most overlooked part of what you have to do, and it affects your focus, it affects your stamina. So it's the best thing I would say is it's an exciting time as a coach. This is a very talented team that is, as many cases that Nick has had, that got to replace a lot of guys and got to replace a lot of coaches. So it's going to be a learning experience for all involved.
Chris, obviously the big conversation this week here in Tuscaloosa has been about Jalen Hurts' comments on Saturday. When you have a guy make a comment to the media that's outside of the team's narrative, how do you think that impacts the team, and also how do you think that impacts him in this quarterback race?
Well, I was very surprised. You don't see that at all happen. I'm a little bit surprised because I admire the young man for staying and being part of it. Everybody just assumed he was going to transfer. That was the whole narrative. I'm impressed, and I give him a lot of credit for sticking it out. Yet when you listen to him, you wonder, why did he? The narrative to me was, I just thought that, he would kind of embrace the challenge and the opportunity. He's certainly disappointed and wants to be the guy, but, if he was that unhappy, then in retrospect, I'm a little bit surprised he didn't leave. Glad he didn't. I think it's too much of that guys just pick up and leave. I think he could have a big impact on this Alabama offense this year, and I think he'll play, even if he doesn't start. What it tells me is that, he's not that happy. My sense is that his dad has a lot to do with maybe how he feels and how he looks at it, but I'm a little bit surprised that there hasn't been, if it is true what he said, the communication about, because I would have bet anything that they both have been clearly told what the expectation level is, just like it is with any player, and what they expect of them going forward. So I'm a little bit surprised that, I'm assuming what he said is true, but surprised if it is, that there wasn't that type of communication, at least as to what the expectation were. And my guess is that, he's going to stay and play this year, and in December when he graduates, leaves. That's kind of how I see it. But I'm a little bit very surprised that somebody steps out to kind of speak on an individual case, and it was pretty clear he was ready to talk to somebody and tell somebody something. So I don't know how this is going to play out, guys. Quite frankly, I would suspect that there would be a heart-to-heart. That, again, I'm surprised it hadn't happened if it hadn't happened.
Chris, this is A.P. Steadham, and I was going to ask you, can you see Nick Saban using both quarterbacks, substantially this season?
I do. I mean, if you look at it, and I don't know substantially, that has to be defined. Last year, I think we saw Tua play. Maybe not as much as they, I think, planned going in. In fact, I know last year the plan was to play a Tua more than they actually did. And I know Nick kind of felt like that maybe it could have been their undoing in the championship game because he didn't have a lot of reps. And seeing defenses, and there were some mistakes made, in adjusting and knowing where to go with the ball and holding the ball too long that could have cost him in the championship game. But obviously we know he made the big plays when he needed to. I think that that both have a chance to play. I think that everything that Nick says is really true. It's about winning the team over and being the leader, being a distributor, being a good decision maker. But I absolutely can see, and this is why I'm a little bit confused that it's kind of gotten to this point, because I think that if Tua plays well, he's and can give them more in the passing game, he's the odds-on favorite. But if he doesn't protect the football, they'll go to Jalen in a heartbeat and play him, and they can win with either quarterback. So I just am of the belief, unlike most people, that you recruit quarterbacks regularly for a reason. You want to have multiple guys, at least two, that can take your team and lead it, because you don't know who's going to be the quarterback in November. Sometimes that decision is made for you with an injury. So, I do see a scenario where they can play. Now, not maybe like how some people think, like, well, we'll do this and we'll just run guys in and out. No, there'll be a structure to it, but I do see both playing and contributing this year.
Chris, do you know of any player that might surprise you for Alabama? Someone maybe you watched, a younger player, or somebody who's been here in a reserve role that you think could really contribute?
Well, I think Patrick Surtain can help right away. I think there's a few guys in this class, again, that can really help. But I think he's somebody that is a little bit bright beyond his years in terms of football acumen, and I think he could be really successful. I think most of the guys that people are aware of on the team, and I don't know if it would be a surprise, but I think the receiving corps has a chance to be really, really good again and again. How much they're able to develop the passing game is going to be key. But, of the guy that might surprise folks and jump out of nowhere, he would be the first one that would come to mind.
Chris, reports coming out today that Washington linebacker, believe the pronunciation, Ale Kahn, or Caho, leaving reportedly, planning on coming to Alabama. What kind of impact could you see him having for the Crimson Tide?
Well, he's a really talented guy. I don't know about immediate impact, but I think he's a guy that can run. He's athletic. He's physical. Pretty good instincts. Good player. I think that depth certainly became a problem for Alabama last year with all the injuries. Rash of injuries took place, but I think he's the type of guy that can come in and help. Now, again, immediately, maybe not so much, but I think in terms of depth as they go along, he'll have a good career at Alabama.
Chris, I was going to ask you, is there a surprise team for you in the SEC?
I think that, to me, and again, the definition of surprise would probably depend on what that. Mississippi State's a really good team. I think that the defensive lines that are the best in the league, I think Alabama, Auburn, and Mississippi State are the best. Georgia's right there as well, but I think Mississippi State has a chance to be really good. Now, everybody's talked about them, so maybe there's not much of a surprise. Now, I don't think that they're surprised like they can win the West, but they're really good, and therein lies the problem. South Carolina's really good. I don't think they're good enough to beat Georgia out in the East, but they're a really good team. Missouri may surprise some folks in that I think they can be a pretty good offense. And, if they win and go to a bowl game, maybe pull an upset, that might surprise some folks. A&M will be a little bit better, but I think that's going to be more into the future. But you're going to see them play with a little bit better discipline and structure. But I think it's going to be, Ole Miss on a given game could beat somebody with an explosive offense, really good receivers. But guys, I think when you're talking about how the West is going to shape up, I think it's Alabama and Georgia. Now, I think Auburn is really good, and I think their schedule is going to be their undoing. But, I'd be really surprised if it's not Alabama and Georgia this year.
The two games on the road for Auburn, Georgia and Alabama. That's
well, yeah. I mean, they got to play Georgia. They play Georgia every year, and that's Georgia's really good, and Alabama plays LSU. LSU's, always a tough battle, but still somebody Alabama should beat. Quite frankly, it should be somebody Auburn should beat. They should have beaten LSU last year. They let them off the hook. But, yeah, that to me, if you look at it, the fact that they've got Georgia on the road and to play Georgia every year is tough, and the fact that they play a good Washington team to start the season, that's tough. I mean, Alabama, Louisville's not very good this year, and so it's not going to be as formidable or as an impressive a win as some of their first-game wins of the past. So it just works out that way that their schedule on the Plains is really difficult.
Chris, we had the discussion earlier in the show talking about this talented but very young and inexperienced Alabama secondary, and you look early in the season when they're still going to be working out the flow of working together in that back four, the back seven, go on the road at Ole Miss in their third game of the year, and then Texas A&M at home the next week. Are those two of the bigger chances for someone not necessarily to beat Alabama, but to have a big threat against the Crimson Tide?
Yeah, I think Ole Miss is the one team that can make a few plays. Now, I don't know. Like you said, it's the issue in a game like that is going to be how Ole Miss can handle Alabama's offense, and that's going to be their undoing ultimately. But, yeah, I think that in terms of the quarterback play and the receiver matchups, it could cause some problems just in one-on-one matchups, meaning you can be in a position to make a play and just not make it against those guys and lose some of those one-on-one battles. Outside of that, Missouri, but you're talking kind of an early part of the year. And I think you're right. Of those games, that would be the one that would, Arkansas State moves the ball well, not nearly as talented. Louisville will do some things schematically that'll challenge him a little, but not, that should be a decisive Alabama win. So, yeah, I think in the early part of the schedule, that's the one team that could maybe cause some resistance against their secondary. And, they'll bring pressure from a little different looks to camouflage it. So I don't think it's going to have an effect on the score, but it's going to be a little bit more challenging from a coaching standpoint.
I want to ask you, Chris, you're a great expert from a coaching, scouting perspective, and something that doesn't get a whole lot of talk when we're talking about this quarterback battle. Let's say for this discussion that Tua wins the job at quarterback. Would Jalen Hurts be better suited, looking down his future, if he wants to play in the NFL, to change positions here at Alabama and stay and play, or would he be better suited, in your opinion, to go somewhere else and play quarterback?
Well, in terms of his pro future, it's not at quarterback in the NFL. I can tell you that I've done this for 30 years. He's just not a good enough passer to be a quarterback in the NFL. I mean, that's a problem that Lamar Jackson is facing right now. Lamar Jackson is significantly better as a passer than Jalen Hurts was and is. So he doesn't have quarterback future in the league, but he's certainly an outstanding college quarterback, and there's no shame in that. So, again, what does he want? I mean, it's certainly not my right to say. If he was just asking me on pro potential, yeah, it would be at another position. To the ability to show that you can do something else would be important. But here's the thing, guys: the college game is so different, and the offenses are so different. I think the guy is not a good, but a great college quarterback. He's just not a great passer. I think the guy protects the football. I think the guy gets them out of some bad plays at times and makes some big-time plays for the offense. For a guy that wants to be successful, the guy could, in my mind, Alabama could win every game this year with Jalen Hurts at quarterback or Tua. I believe that. Now, it might be a challenge, let's say, against a Georgia again or in the playoffs if they need more passing game. I think Tua needs to learn how to read defenses better and protect the football better, because Jalen does that better. Jalen needs to make plays from the pocket better, as a passer. So while both are good, both are flawed, like any player. I think Jalen would be great somewhere else if that's what he wants to do. If he wants to get it, get the job handed to him, and there's no doubt about it. But is it going to make him a good enough passer to be an NFL quarterback? No, I can tell you that with certainty, having been a scout in the league for 30 years now. It's just not. There are a lot of guys that are good passers in college that are not good enough to be good passers in the NFL. And Jalen's very, very limited as a college passer. So, that maybe doesn't answer your question, but at least it's how I see him, and certainly wants what's best for the young man in his future. And certainly, I personally think he's got a future and can really help Alabama. But it's a tough spot. When you're the head guy, you're the guy that gets the starting job. You want that job, and if you don't get it, that's what happens today, guys, doesn't it? I mean, you lose your job, you want to transfer somewhere else, and I at least applaud him for sticking it out to this point.
If he's not at quarterback, Chris, what do you think his biggest attribute would be to offer Alabama at another position?
Well, his run skills are good. So, but the thing about it is I can't fully answer it because I haven't put him through ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. So, playing out of the slot and being a big slot and doing some things there and catching the ball, that's not something that I've seen him do enough. I've been out there at practice and done some things with the staff there to where I've seen him do things athletically, but structurally, haven't seen that. So it's a really good question, and at this stage, that's not something they would ask him to do. It's not something that he wants to do, at least from my understanding. In terms of a skill set, he's a good runner. If he wanted to, and that was his mindset, guy could be a really good safety. But that's not, that transition is a little bit too far beyond, and not something that's in the cards.
Chris, is this one of the better years for quarterbacks in the conference, and would you be able to rate the top 5 in your mind?
Yeah, I think it is one. I mean, I think it's one of the years where you sit there and say, everybody says the quarterback's not really good in the league. Jarrett Steadham is good. Love Drew Lock at Missouri. Nick Fitzgerald is a good player. The Alabama situation's a little bit better than people might think. Because I think they've got 2 that can play. But I think it is really good. And I like the Georgia quarterback situation pretty good. So, no, I think it's really good, and we'll see what Florida can do and what Dan can muster there. And I think the kid at South Carolina, Jake Bentley, is talented, but he's got to be more consistent. So I do think it's a better year than we've seen in the SEC for a few years.
Chris, real quick before we let you go, is it fair? ESPN had a ranking out yesterday of the best players and best quarterbacks in college football, and believe they had 2 at either number, I think, second best quarterback in the league, in all of college football, and 13th best player overall. You think that's fair to put him that high?
No, he hadn't done enough yet. I mean, in fact, I didn't answer your question. I would say Drew Lock and Jarrett Steadham in the league are 2 more proven guys. It doesn't mean that Tua doesn't have the ability, and by year's end, if we're having this conversation in October, November, that's a fair conversation. He hadn't played enough. I mean, to put him in the category with the other top quarterbacks in the country, I don't think it's really. I think they're guys that are more proven at this point. Not necessarily. I wouldn't say they doesn't belong there, at least in terms of physical skill set and potential. But there's other guys that much more accomplished at this point, in my view.